And welcome back. This is Microsoft Virtual Academy. We're using all the XAML tooling for XAML developers. We're at the end of the day. This is Module 6. We went through everything in Visual Studio, everything in Blend, built a quick little app in a store app with all of the new controls and tooling. Now it's time to kind of talk about a little bit of XAML tips, tricks, little candy that you and I like to talk about, and take your questions as well. So right now, if you have any questions, please preface those inside the chat dialog with question : and we'll go from there. And in the meantime, while those are coming in, let's talk about different things. And one of the things inside Blend that I think is totally cool is path operations. One of the things that people just don't know about is as well. I wonder if you might pull up Blend and show us some of the basic path operations that developers can do.
Absolutely. So, okay, there's my screen. I'm going to show you like some of the very basic tools we have for editing paths. One of the tools that's really nifty is if you wanted to do like quick operations that are commonly known in the design space as Boolean operations, where you want to do things like unite paths and things like that. So what I'm doing here is I'm selecting two rectangles. I can go to the object menu. By the way, the object menu has a lot of interesting things like alignments. If I want to left align the two edges and things like that, you can do all that. But one thing that's sort of in there is this option of combining paths. So in this case, I've drawn two rectangles. Now, rectangles are not really paths. They are shapes. But at the end of the day, we can do the work of converting them to paths for you. So in this case, let me go ahead and select Unite and see what exactly happens. We basically get a single path. That sort of is the union of the two rectangles.
The two rectangles are gone, and now this union. I see.
Let's look at some of the other things you could do. Like, for example, you could go to Combine and do something like subtract. So now what you've done is you've sort of subtracted a path from another path. But
and how did it pick one to subtract and one to keep?
It's the one at the top versus the one at the bottom.
Okay, so it's a z-index that's doing
it does one relative to the other. But then you could do things like intersect, which is like, you know,
only where they overlap.
Exactly, and so on and so forth. So you have like all these interesting path operations that you can sort of bring together to sort of create your
divide. So now it's 3 pieces.
That's correct. Yeah.
Oh,
like
cool.
Not 3 pieces, but it is 3 sort of paths that are sort of stitched together.
And you could change 3 different colors that way.
Exactly. So for example, in this particular case, now you can select the subselect tool. So each of these, just keep in mind that they are path things.
The white select, the little white arrow.
You can select that, and you can start making changes to the path. You know, so in this case, you can see like that's the last operation we did, which was like divide in some ways. So you can see like you have like a lot of path points to sort of work your magic on. You know, so the more common scenario, of course, the one that's the most common is of course unite in some ways. So let's go ahead and do that. Combine, and then oops, let me select both of them. I already did that. Select the two rectangles, select object, combine, and unite, and then use the subselect path editing tool to start making some tweaks. Let's say I wanted it something along those lines. Now the path tools allow you to do Bezier operations as well. So I can press the Alt key and I get the handle for sort of editing Beziers.
Yeah, definitely.
Now keep in mind that Blend's not the most powerful path editing tool. It's only useful for making quick edits to your paths, right? So in this case, I can sort of change the curvature and things like that. I can select the handles, and then sort of change the, curve handles and things like that. So you can do basic Bezier editing in Blend as well. So that's sort of like the quick basics of paths. There are other commands here as well. So for example, there is the path commands for sort of not everything is available for Windows Store apps, but you can certainly create a rectangle and do the basic path command of like converting it to a path.
Right.
Or you could do more fancy things like, not that you would probably want to do this, but just in case, because fonts have usual glyphs that are interesting and things like that. So let's say you have a text block, and then you increase the font size so folks can see what's going on. So let's go ahead and select 20, I guess. Zoom in a little bit as well. You can take the text element and convert it to a path as well. So now you essentially have text.
So it's no longer text. It's really drawing.
Exactly. Now if you use the subselect tool, you can see that there's a whole bunch of path points that that sort of make up the text. We try to retain the font as much as we can, and sort of rasterize that to a path.
Yeah.
So again, useful if you want to sort of like, have like logo text and things like that, which are not really localized. And
go back to the other selector for just a second, the main selector, and then select text again. And just out of curiosity, if anybody was wondering, what is?
Oops, what happened there?
There you go. What is the? What is that center circle?
That's the center point. So if you were to rotate your element, that's the pivot point.
That's
around
where the
which
axis is. And
exactly.
I can move that.
Exactly. So you could change this to a different pivot point. So let's say here. And now you rotate, and you notice that like it's pivoting around that particular pivot point as well. Again, you would use some of these features if you're doing fancy animations, like text swinging into place or whatever it is. Right? So you kind of use that as well.
Nice.
So those are some of the basic path editing operations that you could potentially do in Blend.
Makes sense. All right. Well, the questions are rolling in, so let me start going through them and see if see what we can do.
Sure.
All right. So we'll just kind of go down the line, and what is it? Let's see. How am I going to slow these down? These are a lot of them. What's the property or event that is raised when the screen size is changed? What's the property or event that's raised when the screen size is changed? Actually, let me handle that and go and show it quickly in. Jump to my Visual Studio for a second, and I'll show you right here in Module 2, we have Device Panel, and I have a, if you go to the code behind of grouped items, I have the code that you can, or maybe it's not grouped items, maybe it's grouped item detail, or maybe it's, where is it? It's right here. It's not there. Got it so you can have it. Ah, there it is. I was right. It is in the grouped items page of the device panel, and it's right here in, this is line 59. And so update orientation. And so what happens is, let me pull that in. Right here, window.current.sizeChange, that's the event that occurs. But how are you going to actually read it? There's a couple of ways. The first one, you can use application view, get for current view orientation. That gives you one of two options. It gives you landscape or portrait. That may not be enough for you. That means you can also use window.current.bounds.width to see whether or not it's 320 or any other specific, and determine whether or not that's your minimum. So you can get at a high level, you can use the application view to tell you if it's landscape or portrait, but then at a specific level, you can use window.current.bounds.width to get whatever the user might have just changed it to. So this is how you get it, and then this is the event that's raised, window.current.sizeChanged.
Yeah. Another question that's coming in is F# an OK language to use for Windows Store apps? No, today the supported language is, of course, F# is supported in Visual Studio, but for Windows Store app development, the supported languages are C#, Visual Basic, and C++.
Yeah. It's a tricky question because it makes it sound like there's something wrong with F#, but that's not the case. It has a targeted use case. This really isn't it. We could force it to happen, but it's not.
Exactly. Let's see. I'm just trying to read some of these questions. Another question is the animation or the timeline editor available as a custom control? Unfortunately not. There is no animation system that you can just host. Of course, you could consider writing your own, but not rehost the Blend animation system.
When data binding, you mentioned that a style can have a template. Well, a style can set a template, that's for sure. Is it simply two-way binding settings that allows you to pull information from, say, a text box control? Okay, so that, I believe what they're really talking about is the template, the parent template source. And so that's when you're doing data binding, it data binds to whatever the data context is, unless you specifically set it to the templated parent. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
And the templated parent then is how you would go out to the text box in that case.
Exactly. Another question, how do you install and validate the app you wrote into the Windows App Store? So clearly when you're building your app, you should consider using the Windows App Certification Kit that we just demonstrated at the beginning of this day. That's one way of validating. Let me also say,
design.windows.com, there's the whole suite of guidelines that will drive you along the way to make sure that you're not going down the wrong path in the first place.
Yep. And that's sort of like one of the ways. And then the second way is, of course, test your app, check for performance issues and things like that. And, that's pretty much.
This is clearly a WPF question. For custom expressions, when should they be used and when not be used?
By custom expressions, I mean...
Binding expressions, I'm assuming?
In most cases, we do have rich value editors in the property inspector that you can use to customize a bunch of these markup extensions. I mean, that's primarily for the markup extension scenario. We see people writing extensions for localization, for example.
Yeah.
If you were to write a custom markup extension to handle localization, there is no value editor that we give you that allows you to set this markup extension. So in that particular case, you could consider typing in your markup extension using the custom expression editor in the property inspector.
That is not an option in Windows Store. And I think this is a worthwhile question. There are some differences in the XAML that's in Windows Store and WPF. And WPF is unbelievably broad. I mean, just the super duper set of the XAML specification. And then Windows Store, there's some things that are not there. Some of them are because they just haven't been implemented yet. Some of them there's no real plan to implement them, partly because, and I think it's worth people just understanding, performance is always a big deal for Store apps.
Absolutely.
And some of the features that are awesome in WPF are actually a detriment to performance.
Yep. I'm not entirely sure if markup extensions fall into that bucket, but certainly that's a valid concern. Any feature we build for Windows Store apps, we sort of make sure that they're really performant. They sort of hit the scenario that we are trying to sort of nail, as opposed to en masse port everything over. So,
well, one example might be the clipping, how you can use a rectangle geometry to clip any control, but you can't use a path geometry in Store, partly because that is very costly. Yeah. Okay, great. Let's see. This says in an enterprise store. Now, I would assume an enterprise store is the delivery of Store apps internally.
Yep. Without going through the Microsoft Store. I'm guessing that I read the question like that.
Yeah. Do the apps need to run through some automated certification program? Well, here is the guideline for this. And you probably should speak to it, but let me just say this. The Windows Application Certification Kit. Did I say that right? The WAC?
Yep.
Yeah. The WAC should be run no matter where your app is. That means if it's internal only and you're sideloading it through GPO, then it should still pass WAC. If it is external and you're going through the public store, it obviously must as well. And that's partly because as we're revving versions of the framework, that is a kind of a guarantee that your app won't be negatively impacted by those changes. If you break every single rule and then deploy your app inside the enterprise, it might work, but where's the guarantee that every rev of Windows, every update to Windows won't break it? Because we can't test every rogue implementation. We can only test so many. So as a rule of thumb, whack everything.
Yeah. Another question that's coming up. So should you not use WPF for Windows Store apps and use a store template instead? I mean, the fundamental question you have to ask is, are you building a desktop app? Are you building like one of these full screen immersive apps? I mean, if you're building a full screen immersive app, you should use some of the templates that we demonstrated today. If you're building a desktop app, that's perfectly fine as well. The same features that we demonstrated pretty much exist. Actually, like Jerry was saying, WPF is a superset to a certain extent of all of this functionality. You can use a WPF template
Now,
as well.
I think there's probably a follow-up question that I would have, and that is, if I was building a desktop app, interacting with the database, interacting with local services, doing all of these things, is WPF a valid option for me to build a desktop line of business application?
Oh, absolutely it is. I mean, Visual Studio and Blend are built using WPF, so they are pretty sophisticated large-scale apps. Visual Studio talks to a large number of services and things like that, so that's as good an example of a WPF app as
Visual Studio and Blend are written in WPF.
Yep.
I mean, just that by itself is a huge credential to WPF.
Yep.
Yeah. This says, is the Hub app template and/or control available in Windows Phone?
For Windows Phone 8, there is a similar control, the Panorama, which sort of satisfies the similar effect. In some ways, it has parallax built in and things like that, but it is the same idea. You have like a hero header text, and then like you essentially have different sections, and you can navigate across the multiple sections. So the Windows Phone 8 version of that is the Panorama. The design experience is fairly similar to what we saw for the Hub app.
Yeah. Yeah. Going forward, obviously, everything is going to converge more and more and more, but that's the way it is today. Let's see. The best way to debug a binding failure. That's a good question, especially in the context of knowing that Silverlight 5 had binding debugging. How would you debug a binding?
Yep. By the way, some people are asking, probably we should slow down a little bit because we are sort of speaking too fast, so I'll try to sort of do that as well.
Yeah, no problem. We'll speak a little slower.
So the question is, like, what about runtime debugging of your apps and like binding, right?
Yeah.
Today, for Windows Store apps, for in particular, we do not have a great story there. This is something that we are actively investigating. Folks who have built a XAML app know tools like XAML Spy that sort of help you diagnose the running application for issues and things like that, but we do not have a great story for debugging data bindings. The best we have is you can sort of listen to the trace events that the runtime emits, and the output console window of Visual Studio lists some of these errors as they happen.
If you have a typo in your binding or something like that, it shows right up in your output window.
Yeah.
Have you ever used a converter to debug a binding?
People kind of do that as well. You can write a value converter and see what's coming in and what's the value that's getting passed
I've done that
out.
a lot, actually.
But fundamentally, I think it's good feedback to us that we should go look at, what does it take to build great diagnostic tools going forward.
Yeah. You're the right person to talk to about it, for sure.
Absolutely.
Let's see. How much of you guys peer program with us, Blend? Wait a minute, what does it say? How much to have you guys peer program with us? How much? Hey, everybody has a price, right? And we've all got prices. Just email us. Just kidding. Don't do that. This is not a solicitation. Just joking. All right.
The text will come too.
Oh, great question. This is definitely for the store. How to incorporate WebGL. I understand it's okay in Microsoft Store. That is true. How would you incorporate WebGL?
Depends upon the scenario. I mean, WebGL is interesting. You could potentially use a web view. Haven't done it.
Yeah.
You could potentially embed a web view into your app, and that should work, though.
That's all you have to do, actually.
Exactly.
As soon as you include a web view, and of course the new web view in 8.1 doesn't have any of the airspace issues or anything like that anymore.
Exactly.
You can include all the web.
For full disclosure, I've not tried it, but that's probably should work. Like if you embed the web view and then point your web page to a valid HTML, CSS content that
I have
has
tried it. It's
WebGL.
flawless.
Great.
Just like that.
Sounds good.
Yep. All right.
Are there important differences between Windows 8.1 and Windows Phone 8 XAML features? Not from a conceptual level. Like the concepts that you learned today, or we demonstrated today, are equally applicable to any XAML platform, including Windows Phone 8 as well as WPF. Some of the APIs might be in slightly different namespaces. Some of the controls might exist versus not, but the basics remain the same. You still have multiple pages in your app. You can navigate across multiple pages. You have the notions of styles and animations and resources and things like that. Data binding works the same, so the concepts are all equally applicable.
This is a great question, and I get this often. And I don't know the best answer for this. Is if somebody comes to you and says all this stuff that you and I have been talking about is awesome about Blend and XAML, just give me a recommendation to a book. Do you have a go-to book? I feel like there's a gap in the in the world that there's not an awesome Blend and XAML book, right?
Yeah, I mean that's, for example, when people knew a good example is when folks start on our team, right? Either in the engineering organization or the program management organization.
Right.
They do not have background for building XAML apps, and it's often a challenge to sort of like get them to learn and sort of like boot up their skill set. I don't have a good answer. I mean, there's lots of books out there. Like if you go to Amazon and search for XAML, you'll see a lot of recommendations. I haven't read one personally, so I can't say for sure as to whether I can recommend one or the other. But there are good books. I mean,
there are, and probably it's wrong to just say there aren't any, because then that's kind of derogatory towards the ones that are out there. But as far as the go-to Bible, yeah, there just isn't that one that's kind of raised to the top, that isn't too high level, isn't too low. I know there's none that are too low level, frankly.
Yeah.
They're all very high level, and it's very conceptual rather than practical. I would love to find it.
Yeah.
I would absolutely love it. If you're an author and you have that book, send it to me, and I'll look at it, and I'd love to recommend that to developers all the time.
Yeah, so here's another question. Do we need to upgrade from VS 2012 to VS 2013 in order to use any of the new Windows 8.1 features? It's important to say that Windows 8.1 development is only supported in Visual Studio 2013. So if you're using VS 2012, you would not be able to create a Windows 8.1 project. You would be able to create a Windows 8 project, but not Windows 8.1. Now, there are features that are unique to Windows 8.1, which of course will only be available in Visual Studio 2013. But there are also features that Visual Studio 2013 also allows you to open and edit a Windows 8 app. So if you were to use Visual Studio 2013 to edit a Windows 8 app, you would get some of the features like the data binding improvements we showed today, or the resources, go to definition, rulers and guides, and things like that. Yeah. You would just not get some of the new controls that are available as a part of the Windows 8.1 framework.
With an interesting caveat that Visual Studio 2013 can open up a Windows 8.0 app.
That's correct.
If you're running in Windows 8.1.
That's correct.
You cannot open a Windows 8.anything app from Visual Studio 2013 in Windows 8.0. That's just the way it is. However, Visual Studio 2013 on Windows 7, Visual Studio 2013 on Windows 8, Visual Studio 2013 on Windows 8.1, in a WPF scenario, go to town. It works all the way across, even all the way back to Windows 7.
Absolutely. Another question that's sort of coming up and I wanted to answer was, what is this whole behaviors SDK? So, and why is this not a part of the framework? I mean, that's an interesting question. We certainly have designed it in such a way that it looks fully integrated as just like any other XAML construct. You do need the behaviors SDK to sort of use behaviors either in Blend and Visual Studio, just because the platform doesn't support these. What happens going forward, I can't say, but certainly be fully confident that Visual Studio is fully invested in supporting behaviors today and going forward. Yeah. So when you take a dependency on behaviors, you are shipping the app that you're shipping to the Windows Store or the Windows Phone Store or WPF carries the binaries along with the app. So the apps are redistributed by you. So if you were to get a bug fix from us, you'd have to republish and package, and that's pretty much the only difference there is. Yeah. We are fully committed to sort of supporting the runtime and making sure that any issues that you report are addressed by us and so on and so forth.
Nice. Here's a question that says, are there any new features in XAML/MVVM frameworks? And so this is at least an opportunity to say, there is no MVVM framework built into ours, right? If you are going to use an MVVM framework, you're going to be importing a third party like MVVM Lite or maybe Charmed or something like that, or maybe Prism, right? Microsoft Patterns of Practice does write Prism, which is an MVVM framework for store applications. There is nothing built in, so is there an upgrade to it, or is there other new features? Well, you would have to ask those third party, and some of them do.
Yeah. By the way, since so many questions are coming in, just in case we miss some, please do paste it again, and we'll sort of definitely get it in the second round. Yeah. We might have read over a few of these, so our apologies for the same.
Uni, is it possible to use a color animation instead of an object animation using keyframes?
I saw that question, and the second point of that question is, why are the animations not fluid? Actually, that is not correct. When you use Blend and you drop n number of keyframes, we do the right thing of converting between color animations as well as animations using keyframes. Color animations and double animations and things like that are important if you want to keep your XAML succinct and you sort of want to just animate between two values. It is still smooth. It's not like you're getting a discrete change. It's over time. Object animation with keyframes, it just allows you to sort of put more discrete
granularity
values
control
in there.
over it.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's basically the same.
Yeah.
A color animation and a keyframe animation.
Well, there is a color animation and then a color animation using keyframes, right? And the Blend tool does the right thing of making sure that your XAML is as compact as possible. So if you just care about animating between color A to color B, there is no reason for us to add like 4 more lines of XAML to make it a keyframe animation. But if you really care about adding a third keyframe, you cannot use color animations anymore, and we automatically promote the animation.
Like from red to green back down to blue or something like that.
Yeah, so we do the right thing, and in all cases, unless you decided otherwise, you can opt out of this, of course, animations will be smooth over time.
When starting a new project in Blend, target towards Windows Phone, should that be Silverlight? Should that be a Silverlight app? Windows Phone certainly uses the Silverlight specification when it implements XAML. It's not a Silverlight app, though. A Silverlight app is meant for the browser.
Yep. More questions?
Yeah. Is it possible to quickly create multiple horizontal grids in Blend with XAML and still have semantic zoom work correctly? Multiple horizontal grids. Let's go to the next one. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I'll
Everything's
answer
possible.
This one. The question is, should we install VS 2012, 2013, Blend for VS 2012, and Blend for VS 2013 on the same dev machine? The answer is perfectly fine. You can do that. And just keep in mind that most frameworks, actually most things that you could ever care about, are supported by VS 2013.
Right.
assuming you don't have any issues with acquiring a particular SKU, monetary or otherwise, I don't see any reason why you would use VS 2012 once you have VS 2013. The projects are perfectly round-trippable. So for example, if you were to create a WPF 4.5 app in Visual Studio 2012, you could just send that without any changes to a user who's using VS 2013 and vice versa.
So half your team could be using 2013, half 2012. That WPF app would open fine for everybody.
Visual Studio has put a lot of emphasis in ensuring what we call round trippability, which is the ability to interchange the solution and project files between different versions of Visual Studio. So I just don't see a reason why you would use VS 2012. That said, if there is any reason that I can't foresee, absolutely everything is side by side, and you can install it on the same machine with high confidence.
If you do have a Windows Phone 7.something app, that will only open in 2012. 2013 won't open up Windows Phone 7.
That's correct.
That would be the only thing that maybe would be there. Here's a good question about brushes in store apps. This is asking about the pattern brush, but we could go ahead and ask about the visual brush as well. Where are those brushes? Where's the radial gradient brush in Windows Phone or Windows?
Windows Store does not support the radial gradient brush per se, but that said, if I take a look at if I go back to my screen over here, it does support a lot of those other brushes. For example, there is the gradient brush. It just is not. It's linear gradient. It's not linear gradient. You have the notion of an image brush.
Image brush.
Right now, there is no tiling option here. So somebody asked that question: can you tile your image? There's no support for tiling today, so you'd have to do that maybe in Photoshop and then export the image or something like that.
Or there are a lot of solutions on Stack Overflow for this as well. I mean, there are ways you could do it yourself. It's just not built in.
Yeah. So and then of course the brushes have transforms as well. So if I didn't want to rotate my element, but I wanted to rotate the brush, I can certainly apply a brush transform as well. So that's supported.
And there is no pattern brush,
That's
where you'd have vector images that repeat or stretch.
That's correct.
Yeah, they're just not there. Now you know. All right. Boy, there's so many. It's awesome.
Let's go back to our questions.
Let's see. Can you use XAML to target Xamarin? Can you use that? I'm going to have to move on because you wouldn't do that. Xamarin is a way of having C# target other platforms. Let's see. Would it be too much trouble to keep... No. I often write console apps to learn a concept. Is there a console for XAML?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, the
XAML pad, that's sort of kind of like a console.
I guess the question is, can you build a console application?
Oh, can you build a console
That's
application?
what I read the question as. Maybe I'm just misunderstanding.
I think they just meant, is there a dirty way, a down and dirty,
Got it.
not a whole bunch of framework. The blank store app is the easiest, and there's just almost nothing to it. That's the way I would start.
The XAML blank app is as vanilla as it gets. It has no extra stuff in it, like suspension manager or any of that stuff. Just create a blank app, draw a button, and you're up and running within a second.
Which patterns do you use to help with the application business structure apart from VVM? Which patterns used to help with business application structure apart from VVM? I don't know.
VBM or MVVM?
MVVM, yeah. Gosh, I feel like I want to answer this question. I just don't understand it. Let's go to another one. If you're building a business application, you should really look at Prism. I'll just say it that way. You should really look at Prism. All right, because it solves a lot of problems for you that you could solve your own, but it's already solved. Let's see.
Is the normal, one of the questions is it a normal process to begin your projects in VS and then move to Blend as needed? Absolutely, why not? Like, I mean, you sort of like, most apps actually I would say begin, not even in Blend or Visual Studio, they begin on a piece of paper or Photoshop or whatever it is. They begin with an idea. Like PowerPoint is a good example. Many apps actually begin in PowerPoint, where you're sort of presenting your idea to stakeholders, right?
So and that cool storyboarding new feature.
Absolutely.
Great.
So wherever your app begins, like that's not the point. The point is like Blend and Visual Studio allow you to sort of seamlessly move back and forth. It's the same solution. Like you can stay in extended periods of time in either of these tools. Both support basic F5 type of capabilities. Visual Studio is great for coding and debugging. Blend's good for like doing UI work. There is perfect round tripability between the solutions and things like that. So I think it's pretty common for developers to begin their apps in Visual Studio because they're sort of doing structural changes first.
That's right.
Before they dive into the finessing part of their UI.
Yeah, you probably have a view model or something before you have the UI.
So from that perspective, it's perfectly fine to start in Visual Studio, sort of get your basic XAML editing done.
But if you do start with Blend and not Visual Studio, there's no loss. There's no big difference at all. All right, perfect. Let's see. I had a good question here, and I looked right down and didn't. Custom behaviors. Can you put a custom behavior in a portable class library? I suppose so you can share it across phone and Windows.
Not today, because the problem is the portable class library set is a CLR specific concept.
Yeah.
So you can only target the .NET framework assemblies. The behavior types are all derived from dependency object and things like that, which on the Windows storefront is a dependency object that comes from WinRT.
Yeah.
So you cannot share that per
Because
se.
of that mixture of those two, you can't do it.
That's correct.
For now. All right. So, do we need to upgrade? Oh, you got that one. Great.
Another question here is, are there important Blend and XAML additions that we can expect in the next VS update? Absolutely. I mean, we are already working on the Visual Studio 2013 RTM just shipped, I don't know, like a few weeks ago or something like that. And we have already been working on the next update since long before that. So you should continue to expect every 6 months or so cool stuff coming out of.
But I don't think people realize the investment that's being made in XAML. It is heavy.
Yeah.
It is heavy, heavy. Here's an interesting question and easy to answer. Is XAML part of the Office 365/SharePoint story? And the answer is no. Those are HTML5 JavaScript solutions.
Can you host Silverlight apps in a SharePoint site? I don't know about that.
You can. Yeah, you can.
That seems like,
Yeah.
a middle ground there, but absolutely Jerry's right.
Let's see. Do all the cool theme and other features available on Windows 8.1 Developer Framework work for users running 8.0? They don't. They do not. Let's see. This is just yes, no. I'm just going to ask you straight out. Are there best practices for XAML?
I think there are.
Okay. And if you wonder what they are, watch all the stuff we just talked about. Let's see. The norm.
I mean, generally, I would say care about things like performance and correctness early on in your dev cycle. Do what you would do for any app development, like focus on unit testing, focus on writing your tests and things like that. If you're doing tester development, that's fine too. Focus on good architecture. Focus on performant architectures that sort of not just you're using MVVM just because it's the new hot keyword out there. Use MVVM because it buys you something, and at the same time is performant. So keep that in mind. Care about design and care about how you interop with design in some ways. How do you bring assets into your app? Care about, if you're doing Windows Store apps, it's critical that you care about the fact that you are going to run on a variety of DPI settings. How do you make sure that your app looks great at different DPI settings and layout settings, like with different resolutions and things like that? That's something that you should care about as well. So we talked about a lot of these during the course of the day. All of those are equally applicable.
Andre's making the point that XAML is another lightweight XAML editor. I've used XAML tons. I love it as well. Carlos said, my last question is really, really important. Carlos, I didn't even see your last question. Just copy and paste it again so we can make sure that we get it. Which is faster, dependency objects or iNotify property change when you're creating a property? That's interesting. I think it's worth noting that they give you different functionality. With a dependency object, you get the ability to animate that property in an independent way, and then you don't get that with iNotify property change. Just as a simple CLR object, but dependency objects also implements it. As far as which is more performant,
I think the answer is straightforward. Do you need the ability to animate the property?
Yeah.
Things like that, right? Do you need data context inheritance? Then don't use a dependency object.
And I think there's just a reality around dependency object or property is obviously bigger, and this is code and more lines.
So there is a large, we did a lot of this analysis when making a decision on behaviors where we had the same question: should we derive from dependency object or not? We made the decision to derive from dependency objects because we did some analysis of performance and we found that it was not significant in our case, at least these cases that we tested. And then we also found that for us, data context inheritance was critical for the success of that feature. And you only get that if you're using dependency objects. So really it comes down to don't use them if you don't need them.
Okay, so Carlos was asking about the future of Silverlight, basically. Windows 8 will support Silverlight in the future. It does today. You can install the Silverlight plugin to Internet Explorer, and I haven't heard of any news to make Silverlight not work, that's for sure. There's so many Silverlight projects. I mean, we don't want to unwind those, of course. The second question he had is, can I reuse my C# code in XAML for migration of apps, I assume he means from Silverlight into Windows 8. And the real answer is no, but you can actually reuse some of it. The concepts you can reuse all the way across. There's absolutely no copy paste directly into it and trust that it all works. So no, you say you have a 10,000 line app. You're going to have some work to do if you want to migrate it because it is a new platform, for sure.
There's a question on, can you comment on the positioning of items inside a hub section? If my data template for a hub section is a grid, and I set the vertical bottom alignment on it, should I expect the grid to be rendered at the bottom of the section? And that doesn't seem to work. Are there any special considerations for layout in hub section? I think the problem is, let's go back to Blend and take a quick look of why you're seeing what you're seeing. So let's go ahead and create a new project, or actually we can just use this one. Let's delete all these things. Let's go ahead and create a hub control. And please correct me if I'm right or wrong, but what I'm hearing is if I edit the hub section and I put, let's say like a rectangle,
right,
and I say, hey, I want to sort of bottom align this grid, I'm not seeing what I'm expecting to see, right? Nothing really changes. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is if I go and edit the style for the hub section,
because you can edit the style of anything.
Exactly, absolutely. So you can edit the style for the hub section. See that there is a content presenter, and that content presenter is the one that sort of controls actually, let's see, hub section.
It's a child of a grid that doesn't have a height.
Yeah, exactly. So the problem is, if I start deleting this, I lose that, right? So that's really my content. So it really comes down to this guy and what layout properties it has. So in this case, if I sort of bottom align it, it's essentially inside this grid, like Jerry says. And that grid is, if I look at the XAML for the grid, it has this thing set as star. So if I sort of make all of these star, I basically need to play with the settings of the hub section style, and I can change that as well. By default, they have made the hub section's content align to the top. Yeah. And you could potentially change that by changing these properties in the hub section style. There's no magic going on here in terms of, it is just, you could make tweaks to this. Like this should not be star.
If it's not doing what you want it to do, don't think that you can't go in and make changes like what you're doing right now. This
Yes.
should blow everybody's mind to go into some of these fundamental controls and change them like that. It's so cool. So very cool. Let's see. I tried to mix dependency properties, iNotify property, change properties in a single class. It didn't work. Well, it should, because it does. I do it all the time. So I don't know what to tell you except something's just mistaken there. I tell you what, let me tell you this instead of just saying something that sounds more sarcastic than it is. My blog is jerrynixon.com, and right at the top is my contact information. If you really think you've done it all right, and you can create a small sample project that demonstrates the problem, just send it to me, and I'll do whatever I can to help. I mean, I don't have any problem with that at all. I'm jnixon at Microsoft.com, if that helps as well.
Jerry's going to take a $5 wager as well that he's right.
I'm pretty sure I'm right. I'll bet this month's mortgage. That's how sure I am.
How secure is XPF is a question. I don't see XPF as a security feature at all. If you're familiar with the security space, they say security by obscurity is a pretty bad idea, and that's what XPF is. It is security by obscurity. Yes, it is some binary format, but I'm sure there are smart people in the world who can sort of reverse engineer your XAML from that binary format. The reason why we did XPF, sure, it gives you some obscurity, so that kind of makes people feel good. But primarily it was for performance, because we no longer have to sort of parse your large XML file. We sort of do all of that optimization in terms of a node stream that we build out at compile time. So your app's startup perf is faster. That's the only reason why we did XPF, not security.
Mm-hmm. Andre, I see you've asked the Xbox One question more than once. We just can't answer Xbox One questions, I'm sorry. While the questions are kind of queuing up, can I take just a second? I want to show Design.
Sure.
I love Design. It's a free download from MSDN. Anybody can have it. It has a kind of a relationship to Blend, right? Blend and they used to be brothers and sister, and then the family got split up a little bit. So here's Design. I just want to show here on my screen. I can create, and when Uni was talking about that you can do some basic path editing inside Blend, Design is the tool that you can do complex path editing. So for example, one of the things I can do is I'll add a polygon And so right now it's a diamond. I can go over and say, let's make this a 5-pointed star and bring its inner depth in so it feels more like a star. This sort of manipulation is pretty awesome, and it's neat to know a couple things. Because it's a friend, look, I'll just make 5 stars real quick, like it's a rating system. Because this was in the blend family, one of the things I could do after I draw these paths is I can go up here and I can say copy. Of course I can say copy, but I can also say copy XAML, and it's sort of like an export of XAML. I might be in one of the Adobe tools and not be able to export directly to XAML, but I can import, and then it becomes XAML. But here I can export directly. So one of the things I might do is go to do a quick compound path and make it all one path. I could use a linear gradient now. And so here's a nice linear gradient. You can see they all are acting as if they're a single item now with a single linear gradient behind them. And the closer you get these 2 gradient points, the more it looks like a solid. So watch this. I'll do a quick copy XAML. I'll create a brand new project just from you know what? For you guys, I will not create a brand new one. I'll do it right here inside our Solution Explorer. I will say add new project. I'll call it it's a Windows, it defaulted as a Windows format. I love it. And we'll just call this Path App. There we go. There's really nothing to do except to open up the main page and paste this in. I want you to see that because I've copied it, I can have it right here and I can paste it in. If I were to look at the designer, there are those 5 stars and they're ready to go. I tell you, you can interact with it just like it's XAML too. In fact, if I were to go down here and select a slider, now here's the slider. So if I were to draw a slider, let's say that goes right here, I could take its value and change it so that it has a minimum and maximum value. So the minimum's currently, let's see, I want to make it so that I bind it to this gradient who has an offset of a decimal. So what I'll really do is I will select, let me change my pointer. There we go. Let's change it so that it goes from a minimum of 0 to a maximum of 1, and I'll change it so that it has a step frequency of 0.01. That allows me to go from 0 to 1 in the slider, and what I can do that's really beautiful is, I'll delete this second slider I created by mistake, is I can bind the offset right here, F4, bind this offset no longer to be 49%, but instead to be bound to the element inside. So I can say right here, there's my slider, right there, that's my slider. I want to bind it to its current value. And so when I do that, that means every time I change my slider, it changes the value inside. So watch this. I'll copy it again. I'll copy the exact same binding so that both of them are the same. And now when I run it, you'll see that they're bound together, and I can interact with, well, for Pete's sake, I got to set the right one. Everybody saw that and said, don't do it. Set a startup project. There we go. So it'll go ahead and deploy and run for me. Here are my 5 stars. And its linear gradient is data bound to the value of my slider. So I can interact, I can create complex UI and create complex vector images inside design, and then I can treat it just as if it's XAML because in the end, it really is just XAML. Cool.
Yeah. If you can switch back to my screen for a second, somebody was asking the hub section question. I found the answer for that. Since here's a hub section where the content is sort of top aligned, like we said before, the way to sort of fix that would be to edit the style for the hub section. And if you look at the style, there is this property here called vertical content alignment, and that is set to top. You don't want that. You want that to be stretch, in which case now, based on how you want to sort of align your content, you can sort of figure out, so now that I've made that change, I can go back to my data template, and I can sort of now change, like, hey, the grid needs to be like whatever.
And now it sits at the bottom instead of sitting at the top, and you can apply that to all the other hub sections if you wanted to. Nice.
So that's the answer to that.
Oh, this is interesting. FXCOP, or code analysis for XAML. Interesting. I'm not sure what that would actually look for.
Yeah, I mean, the question is twofold. I think, can you run code analysis on your app? Yeah, absolutely. C# code analysis is applicable. Can you run static analysis on your XAML? That's the way I read that question. Can you sort of figure out things like missing resources or something like that at compile time? Unfortunately, today there is no mechanism for you to do that, but this is an area that we are really actively investigating as well in terms of what value can we add in terms of helping you catch more issues at compile time.
Okay. Let's see. They're having an issue with the link. What
yeah,
link
it was www.microsoft.com/expression.
That's where you get it. Let me.
I don't know why the URL redirect of this chat engine is not really working, but that's the.
I just went to it. Works perfectly.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. It would be awesome if periodic clinics. Yeah, no doubt it would. These aren't as easy as you think. This doesn't just happen. Let's see. Has anyone created an add-on to Illustrator that would copy XAML? Not that I know of. Maybe there is, but I'm not. That's not my strength to know.
Yeah, and somebody's saying, hey, ReSharper does some bit of analysis on XAML, and that's correct. So no problem here at all. It's really late night in some parts of the country. So
Athens, Greece, it's very, very
if you're logging
late.
off, we really wanted to say thank you for taking the time to attend. Some really good feedback. I hope you guys learned a little bit here. And then absolutely let us know by our Twitter handles or email addresses.
That's right. We're glad to help if we can. At Jerry Nixon is from me, and Uni, you're at UniR.
That's correct.
UNNIR on Twitter. And just contact us all you want. So a couple things that I want everybody to remember. First, you have this MVA code of BLEND, capital B-L-E-N-D, that gives you the MVA points that you may or may not be interested in. All the code that we've done, I'll check it in. In fact, I'll check it in right now. And it'll be on CodePlex, so you can get that at XAML, XAML.codeplex.com. You can go get all of this and all the other MVA courses. I do a couple other courses, and all the source code is there as well. And so you can go get that if you want it. Let's see. I was going to announce that we have a Q&A at the end, but this is the Q&A. And I think that's it. We have a lot of questions. We're kind of blasting right through them. And I want to mention the poll.
It's up underneath the video.
Oh, look under the video. There's a link to the poll, or maybe the poll is there.
The poll's there.
And be sure and rate it extremely high. Right? Extremely. If you want to have any more sessions on XAML, then you're going to knock this one out of the freaking park. That's exactly right. I don't want to game it, but I'm serious at the same time, 100%. Any big final words, Uni, that you'd like to
No,
toss
I mean,
in?
I just wanted to thank everyone again. Like a long day for you guys. I mean, a lot of people actually stuck through with this 8 hours. That's phenomenal. Thank you again.
Yeah, and thank you for building all the apps you do in XAML and supporting the process the way you do. Again, my blog is jerrynixon.com. One of the things on my blog is office hours. It's an interesting thing that you would never offer, but I will because I'm a developer evangelist, that you can schedule a time with me, and I'm happy to sit down with you for a little while over Skype, look at any questions you might have, try to explain something if you didn't get it. That sort of one-on-one is pretty crazy. I don't do it forever. There's just a few hours a week. But I'm glad to work with any of you that maybe hit a stumbling block or can't get your app in the store for one reason or another. Perfect. Thanks for watching Microsoft Virtual Academy. This has been all the XAML tooling for XAML developers, especially for the store app developers that are out there. But you WPF developers, we love you too. Same thing with phone. Same thing with Silverlight. And we'll see you next time.
Yep.